I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Let's discuss how Judge Aileen Cannon, the Trump-appointed, incredibly corrupt judge, has been screwing herself over in what I believe is her effort to try to help Donald Trump. I think you believe that as well. In the case brought by Special Counsel Jack Smith for Donald Trump's willful retention of national defense information, as well as obstruction of justice, making false statements, as well as other additional criminal conduct. And Donald Trump's co-defendants in that case, the federal case, include his valet, Waltine Nauta, who is represented by Stan Woodward, a lawyer paid for by Donald Trump's political action group. The other co-defendant brought in the superseding indictment is Carlos de Oliveira. Carlos de Oliveira is represented by John Irving, another lawyer paid for by Trump's political action organization. De Oliveira is a maintenance worker who worked at Mar-a-Lago, who was involved in the conspiracy. One of the significant issues that Special Counsel Jack Smith had raised to Judge Aileen Cannon early on, and she invited a lot of additional briefing after she heard something on Fox, which was just a completely ridiculous, meritless conspiracy, was she wanted to ask Jack Smith, tell me the propriety of why there was this grand jury proceeding taking place in Washington, D.C. after you brought criminal charges against Donald Trump here in the Southern District of Florida. Jack Smith, didn't you have to shut down the grand jury in Washington, D.C.? Of course he didn't, and that is inextricably related to what Jack Smith was raising with Judge Aileen Cannon involving the conflicts of interest that you have a Donald Trump political action organization that is paying these lawyers for Waltine Nauta and Carlos de Oliveira. Stan Woodward and John Irving are the lawyers respectively, and they're also representing many of the witnesses in the case who would normally be testifying against Trump and the co-defendants. And Jack Smith appropriately and professionally raised the issues with Judge Cannon. She responded by striking these documents and not letting Jack Smith file certain things under seal. And then she made this demand of Jack Smith that Jack Smith file publicly a response to her inquiry, because she's been striking all the other documents that he was making under seal about why was there this grand jury in Washington, D.C. that was still receiving evidence. So she basically inadvertently tossed a softball to Jack Smith, and he hit it out of the park. And this is how she screwed herself, because in a public document that all of these witnesses were then able to see, who were being represented by lawyers appointed by Trump's political action group, Jack Smith talked about in this briefing, Judge, the reason we have the Washington, D.C. grand jury still hearing evidence, it's no longer hearing evidence, but it was because what we learned is that when the Trump lawyer who was representing Waltine Nauta, Stan Woodward, when he was representing Yusel Taveras, this IT worker at Mar-a-Lago, back in March of 2023, Yusel Taveras lied to the Washington, D.C. grand jury. And then after Yusel Taveras received a target letter that he was going to be criminally prosecuted following Donald Trump and Waltine Nauta being indicted, there was a hearing that was held under the auspices of this grand jury before a Washington, D.C. federal judge, Jeb Boasberg, who addressed the conflicts of interest and spoke to this witness, Yusel Taveras, and provided an independent counsel so Yusel Taveras understood the implications of being represented by a lawyer paid for by Donald Trump. And then Yusel Taveras then went back to that grand jury, and that's why this grand jury has additional remaining jurisdiction, and basically told us under the auspices of this grand jury investigation, he told Jack Smith that he was lying to the grand jury before, and that indeed there was a criminal conspiracy by Trump and Waltine Nauta and Carlos de Oliveira to tell him, the IT worker, to destroy the surveillance footage at Mar-a-Lago. He confessed and admitted to that. And what Jack Smith put in his publicly filed brief, and the fact that it was filed publicly, completely enraged the other lawyers for the co-defendants, Stan Woodward and John Irving. And Jack Smith basically made it clear that based on that information, once an independent counsel was appointed, that then we learned about the crimes of Carlos de Oliveira, and the implication in this publicly filed document, and what we later learned, is that Yusel Taveras is not going to be charged the same way Carlos de Oliveira was charged. So what's the difference between the maintenance worker and the IT worker? The IT worker got independent counsel, told the truth, admitted to lying, did not get prosecuted, and Carlos de Oliveira, the maintenance worker, who continued to have the Trump-appointed liar, continued to, got prosecuted in the superseding indictment. So because that document was filed publicly, Stan Woodward and John Irving were livid, and they said, and they filed these motions with Cannon, this should have been filed under seal. Jack Smith's violating grand jury confidentiality. And then Cannon's in a bind because she's been telling Jack Smith he can't file these documents under seal, and she was the one who asked the question in the first place. Had she not made the inquiry based on whatever it is that she heard in Fox, Jack Smith likely would have filed this under seal the same way she was striking those documents. But because they were now made public in this filing, a lot of witnesses who were being represented by these Trump lawyers are no longer being represented by these Trump paid for lawyers. Now, how do I know that part? Well, it was buried in a filing that was just made at the end of last week in defendant Carlos de Oliveira's opposition to the government's motion for a Garcia hearing. That's what kind of started this all. Jack Smith files this motion for a Garcia hearing to address conflicts of interest before Judge Cannon. She responds with what she heard on Fox, or at least it happened the night before. Jack Smith then talks about what went down in Washington, D.C., and now Carlos de Oliveira's lawyer, John Irving, his first argument is like, there is no conflicts of interest here, Judge. We don't need to do this Garcia hearing. If we're going to do a Garcia hearing, Jack Smith should not be allowed to show up. Only you, Judge Cannon, should make the inquiry. We don't need the government in there. But talk about burying the lead. I guess when the information's not good for you like this, they're going to bury the lead. But like, the basic argument from John Irving, the lawyer for Carlos de Oliveira, is actually the issue of conflict is made a little bit moot by the fact that the witnesses I was representing, the witnesses John Irving was represented, have now no longer being represented by John Irving. They are being represented by independent counsel. It says further, undersigned counsel, meaning Irving, the lawyer for Carlos de Oliveira, is no longer representing these three individuals. New independent counsel is being made available to advise them going forward. And so they're not represented by him anymore. So Cannon's whole point here, she wanted to try to embarrass Jack Smith. Jack Smith then filed a motion publicly responding to her inquiry, not filing it under seal, giving the exact roadmap for witnesses who are being represented by Trump-appointed lawyers, how you can avoid criminal liability the same way the IT worker did, even where the IT worker committed perjury in the first instance by going back and saying, look, I want to tell you the truth now. This is a publicly available document that Carlos de Oliveira can see, Waltine Nauta can see. There's no way their lawyers cannot show them these documents. It's available. We're talking about it here. Heck, if you knew Carlos de Oliveira and if you knew Waltine Nauta, you should say, hey, it kind of seems like right here that cooperation has its benefits in not going with Donald Trump's lawyers. So Cannon screwed her whole plan up by trying to embarrass Jack Smith. Jack Smith responded by saying, okay, Judge, here's your answer. And by the way, here's the roadmap if people want to cooperate and not be prosecuted and provide truthful information. The exact opposite of what Cannon wanted to do. Also, because Cannon's now created this mess on her docket, guess what was able to happen? In Washington, D.C., federal court judge Tanya Chutkan said, okay, then I'm setting my trial on March of 2024, March 4th, 2024. If Judge Cannon ran an expeditious and efficient docket like she should have, Cannon's case could have gone first. But and if Cannon wanted to engage in chicanery and improper conduct, in jury selection and all of these things, that could have caused issues. If she put her trial first, that could have screwed up the other cases after, but Cannon also screwed that up as well. So a lot of Judge Cannon screwing herself over, and I wanted to give you the interplay of how that's happening. Now we've got the D.C. case before Judge Tanya Chutkan for Trump's attempt to overthrow our democracy, also being prosecuted by Jack Smith. That's set to go March 4th, 2024. So as I always say, it's a good thing that Cannon's incompetence matches her corruption. I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Hit subscribe. We're on our way to 2 million subscribers here on the MeidasTouch Network. Wherever you get audio podcasts, subscribe to the MeidasTouch podcast. Also, check us out at patreon.com/MeidasTouch if you want to hear Michael Popak and Karen Friedman-Agnifalo's origin story. We've got it right there on patreon.com/MeidasTouch. Have a great day.
Hey, Meidas Mighty. Love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.